Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS. ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS. ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS. The controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 20. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from Truth in Media, NBC News, All Africa, The Guardian, and Activist Post. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the article entitled, Kamala Harris is Asian and Black. That shouldn't be confusing in 2020, but it is to some.
New announcement alert. We want to officially announce that we are joining the WCRS family here locally in Columbus, Ohio on 92.7 and 98.3. Remember, you can also still listen to the show on your favorite podcast app every Friday at 10 a.m.
Personality.
Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question.
We know to force us to have personalities.
Exactly.
Okay, what questions do you have for us this week?
What do you think ADOS should focus on from now until the election? I know what most of the people on my timeline are focused on, and that's the amazing Kamala Harris and her vice president selection. But what should ADOS be focused on?
And this is another reason why I admire Yvette. We should focus on the same thing we've been focusing on: reparations and a Black agenda. Right now, as Antonio Moore has so articulately identified, that right now, given that Mr. Biden has dropped in the polls and therefore making this more a competitive race, even despite his VP pick, they are susceptible to more scrutiny, and therefore more leverage can be placed on them submitting to some form of a Black agenda or reparations. So we need to stay focused on that and criticize and pressure them until they do so.
So stay on course.
Stay on course.
But not changing what we know that we need. The Black community needs reparations. We need a Black agenda for ongoing services and programs. So from here and now until the election, it's always for me going to be, okay, is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for reparations? Are they for the HR 40 and the edits that Sandy Darity has proposed? Then, okay, I can get on board with that. I've been trying to explain that to my family, but they just seem to think that I should automatically vote for them. And that's because Trump, of course.
Yeah. And that's where the Progressive Party is. They're not pressuring for what's big among them is the UBI. What's big on them is Medicare for all. And they're still not even pressuring them because they're holding their bated breath because they so want Trump out of there. And again, this is where I challenge our people. We cannot and should not hate Trump more than we love our children. And that's what we'd be demonstrating if we continue that self-silencing act that the progressives are into. ADOS knows better. We need to stay focused, and we need to continue the drumbeat of reparations and a Black agenda.
So that means we're coming for your favorite candidates. When we see them, we're going to ask them. I'm pretty sure because of COVID, of course, honestly, these candidates are saved by COVID. Joe Biden doesn't have to be anywhere. Kamala doesn't have to be anywhere where people will be in their faces demanding answers. They can kind of hide behind a Zoom speech. They can hide behind, a DNC convention with no questions are being asked. But if there was no COVID, and that's, I don't want to get in conspiracy theories right now, but because of the COVID, none of these candidates, Republican or Democrat, are being asked questions face to face.
Yeah.
And y'all know they would be on recess, right? And they would be back in their hometowns,
Yeah.
and there would be town halls.
People
there would
be confronting them. Yeah.
yeah, and it would be angry progressives, angry conservative moderates. I'm not sure, but
Well,
they're saved.
I personally don't care about the CIA created concept of conspiracy theorists. I could care less about that. It was created in order to limit thought among thinking Americans. What I will say is that there is evidence that COVID is being used as cover for a lot of operations. One of them is the financial one. We're going to talk later about that in Rapid News. But more specifically for what's going on, I believe they've known or projected the idea that Biden would be the candidate going up against Trump, and it would be problematic. Again, another need to use COVID as a reason why they can't go to large gatherings and confront the representatives to demand the basic necessities of getting through this period. I do not believe that it's coincidence alone that's going on here. It's rather convenient on multiple levels that COVID is being used as a cover for a lot of things. Now, saying that doesn't mean that COVID is not causing damage. People have to get out of this either or thought process that fear often takes people to. What is going on is that they're, at the least that can be said, they're taking advantage of an opportunity so that they can go ahead and posture as symbols that they will give the people what they need, while at the same time not provide policy that meets people's needs. And that's exactly what they're doing. We just can't sit back and let that happen.
Amen. So we'll still be fighting for reparations in the Black agenda until election, until after the election.
Amen. This week in ADOS history, we give listeners a chance to know the strides ADOS made despite efforts to keep us bottom cast. From the week of August 22nd to the 28th, we have
August 1925, 6 men led by A. Philip Randolph organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, a union composed of porters and attendants on the nation's railroad passenger cars. The effort was the most successful Black labor organizing campaign in American history. The Brotherhood would go on to become the largest and most powerful Black-controlled union in America, including more than 15,000 members by 1959. Randolph would also become a major, often behind-the-scenes figure in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. He played a key role in Dr. Martin Luther King's famous 1963 March on Washington. Randolph would often boast that his union was a success not because people loved it, but because it knew how to push people out of the way.
August 27th, 1963. African-American activist and intellectual giant W.E.B. Du Bois dies in Accra, Ghana at the age of 95. Born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, Du Bois was one of the most dominant figures in the African-American struggle against racial oppression for nearly 40 years. He helped fund the Niagara Movement, precursor to the NAACP, and helped organize the first Pan-African Conference in London. Du Bois was a major opponent of Booker T. Washington's Grand Compromise with whites, and he argued frequently with Marcus Garvey's Black separatist ideology. However, the attacker of injustice and defender of freedom would eventually become frustrated with the slow, legalistic tactics of the NAACP and the tenacity of American racism. He turned to socialism and late in life went into self-imposed exile in the West African nation of Ghana. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ados101.com. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
Black Lives Matter Chicago organizer refers to lootings as reparations. From the publication Click Lancashire Independent News. Author and writer Elias Hubbard, standing outside the police station where the arrested looters were being held, A Black Lives Matter organizer, Ariel Atkins, justified the looting and rioting, which caused an estimated $60 million in damages as reparations to which the Black community is entitled. An organizer of the protest, which was put together by members of Black Lives Matter and advocacy group Good Kids Mad City, told a local news outlet that some demonstrators made a decision to leave following conflict with residents, saying they felt unsafe. I graded this article less than necessary. Side note to my fellow Americans, only reparations is reparations. No substitutions exist. And up next,
from the publication Truth in Media, entitled, Has Sweden Beaten COVID-19? One death for the entire month of August. No lockdown, no mask. Tagline, is Sweden beating the rest of the world in terms of beating the coronavirus? It may be too early to tell, but right now it seems like the answer to that question is yes. Writer Ben Swan. In fact, Sweden is crushing it in the month of August. Only one death has been reported in the entire country from coronavirus. Remember, Sweden, with a country that had no lockdowns, no shutdowns of the economy, and does not require wearing face masks. So what is Sweden doing that the rest of the world isn't doing right? Sweden, it appears to be doing better than just about every other place in the world, especially the United States. Yet media constantly criticize the country, saying that they were putting people in harm's way, threatening the lives of people, and yet the numbers now show Sweden's strategy may be paying off in a very big way. The deaths attributed to COVID-19 went from about 50% reduction to falling off a cliff. In April, there were 2,572 deaths attributed to COVID. In May, that number dropped to 1,646. In June, it dropped again to 805 deaths. In July, Sweden reported just 226 deaths. And now in August, Sweden has registered just one death from the coronavirus. I graded this report good. The one Western country that claims they were following science and not orders are having these results. Similar results to ours in previous years during flu or virus outbreak seasons. Funny that. Where was our fine American journalistic institutions on this? Why haven't they been covering Sweden regularly? The only drumbeat we've gotten on Sweden has been how horrible they were for choosing this course and how they were not following science. How many more Americans, how many more ADOS Americans are going to have to lose their lives until the public starts asking hard questions, demanding answers and investigations, instead of just doing as we are being told? And next,
Black Manifesto. From Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, the Black Manifesto was a 1969 manifesto that demanded $500 million in reparations to be paid by white churches and synagogues for their participation in the injustices of slavery and segregation committed against African Americans. The manifesto was developed during the National Black Economic Development Conference held in Detroit, Michigan in 1969. American civil rights activist James Forman presented the first draft of the manifesto on April 26, 1969. The manifesto made the argument that much of America had been built with black slave labor and that churches and synagogues had implicitly played a role in facilitating that process. Its opening paragraph read, "We the black people assembled in Detroit, Michigan for the National Black Economic Development Conference are fully aware that we have been forced to come together because racist white America has exploited our resources, our minds, our bodies, our labor. For centuries, we have been forced to live as colonized people inside the United States, victimized by the most vicious racist system in the world. We have helped to build the most industrial country in the world." I graded this information good. And up next,
from the publication All Africa, entitled Africa, Racism and Self-Hate, Why Africa is Not Innocent, written by Majid Dahiru. Just as it was an enabler of the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, tribalism has also manifested in post-colonial Africa in the form of divisive, exclusionist, conflicting, and destabilizing politics of ethno-geographic identity, which has proven to be an anathema to the collective development of Black African states in the contemporary world. This is why it was easier for Obama, a Black American, to be elected president of white majority America than would have been possible for Obama, an ethnic minority Luo, to be elected the president of his majority ethnic Kikuyu native country of Kenya. Due to the low level of integration and assimilation of the people of Black Africa, Ilhan Omar had to take refuge in faraway America following the destabilization of her native Somalia due to protracted intra-tribal clan wars, where her success story as a refugee turned congresswoman is only possible. Racism is bad, but tribalism is worse, as there is no greater tragedy that can befall a people than self-hate. I graded this excellent. The problem of tribalism is the work our brothers and sisters on the mother continent must solve before a Pan-African state can be realized and maintained. In the meantime, ADOS must resist yet another affront to our existence by those being used by white elites to supplant us. I would like to thank Muath Al-Khattab for providing this article. And next,
Black entrepreneurs start businesses at higher rates than other groups. Analysts find. From the publication Black Enterprise, author and writer Zinjwar Nwamika, Black entrepreneurs start businesses at higher rates than other groups and have high rates of female entrepreneurship, according to a new analysis by researchers at Babson College. The research shows consistently higher rates of entrepreneurships among Black Americans. On average, from 2014 to 2018, about 20% of the Black population in the U.S. started businesses, compared to roughly 12% of the white population and nearly 13% of the Latino population. The analysis found, we know that the Black population tends to have higher unemployment rates and lower average earnings, said Babson College professor Donna Kelly, who co-authored the research. It may be that entrepreneurship represents really an opportunity to have independence in your work, have more control over your work, and the possibility of earning more than you would earn in a job. I graded this article okay. The article did not address that even though we start businesses at a higher rate, it still has not lifted our communities out of the bottom of the wealth gap. Business has not been the answer. And up next,
from the publication The Guardian, entitled Black Babies More Likely to Survive When Cared For by Black Doctors, a U.S. Study. Tagline, when cared for by white doctors, Black babies are about 3 times more likely to die in the hospital than white newborns. From the writer, Guardian staff. In the U.S., babies of color face starkly worse clinical outcomes than white newborns. Earlier research from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published last year shows that Black babies are more than twice as likely to die before reaching their first birthday than white babies, regardless of the mother's income or education level. While infant mortality has fallen overall in the past century, thanks to improvements in hygiene, nutrition, and healthcare, the Black-white disparity has grown. Multiple interrelated factors which contribute to these disparities include structural and societal racism, toxic stress, and cumulative socioeconomic disadvantages. The new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences suggests the race of the attending doctor also plays an important role. I graded this good. Excellent for drawing a much-needed connection between Black infant death and white, ultimately dispassionate doctors' care for our progeny. Fair, in that, like most articles in this vein, they fail to draw connections to other related research studies. This report coincides with Articles of ADOS Episode 16's Race is a Risk Factor for Post-Operative Death in Apparently Healthy Children in the United States. Please get informed and ADOS activated. And next,
voter suppression, the birth of apathy. From the publication North Dallas Gazette, author and writer Alan R. Gray. It is difficult to determine where the line between voter suppression ends and voter apathy begins. What is certain, though, is that the line of demarcation between the two has been blurred by decades upon decades of interference from damning schemes that strip Black Americans of their legal right to have a say when it comes to elections. Know that voter apathy for Black voters is not innate. It is instead a psychological implant that has been nurtured over time and has evolved over generations due to the many mutations of the poll tax. Today, we would be hard-pressed to find the Ku Klux Klan at polling places burning crosses and crops to turn voters away, but contemporary methods of suppression have proven to be just as effective acts of violence. I graded this article excellent. And up next,
from the publication Activist Post, entitled Blue Leaks Reveal Fusion Centers Employ Undercover Agents to Target Activists. Tagline, Police documents released as part of the Blue Leaks hack details how law enforcement is tracking activists via social media while empowering private citizens as threat liaison officers. Written by Derek Brose. On June 19th, 2020, 269 gigabytes of internal U.S. police documents were released by the group Distributed Denial of Secrets as part of the Blue Leaks operation. Blue Leaks has been called the largest hack of U.S. police. The collection contains intelligence files, mostly drawn from law enforcement fusion centers. Some reports on Blue Leaks have shown police using counter-surveillance methods on Black Lives Matter protesters and concerns of face masks blocking facial recognition. However, due to the size of the Blue Leaks files, important information is still being found and reported on. I graded this report good. Excellent that we are learning how police function beyond protect and serve are being revealed in Blue Leaks reporting. This overshadows their PR-generated protect and serve false appearance, when it should be clear by now that one of their functions is to contain and limit valid, constitutionally protected protests in this country. Fair, and that this and other articles fail to connect the dots to government bureaucracies who are sworn to protect our constitutional rights, who implement and monitor all of this. And next,
America's last slave ship could offer a case for reparations. Tagline: the people whom Timothy Meyer enslaved emerged from the war with freedom, but little else. From the publication NBC News, author and writer Jay Reeves. Alabama steamship owner Timothy Meyer financed the last slave vessel that brought African captives to the United States, and he came out of the Civil War a wealthy man. His descendants with land worth millions are still part of Mobile's society's upper crust. The people whom Meyer enslaved, however, emerged from the war with freedom, but little else. Now, the history of Meyer and the slave ship Clotilda may offer one of the more clear-cut cases for slavery reparations, with identifiable perpetrators and victims. While no formal push for reparations has begun, the subject has been bubbling up quietly among community members since earlier this year, when experts said they found the wreckage of Clotilda in muddy waters near Mobile. Some say too many years have passed for reparations. Others say the discovery of the ship makes the timing perfect. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication Activist Post, entitled Lockdowns, Coronavirus, and Banks, Following the Money, written by Anthony James Hall. It usually makes sense to follow the money when seeking understanding of almost any major change. The strategy of following the money in our current convergence of crisis in late summer of 2020 leads us directly to the lockdowns. The lockdowns have, for starters, been directly responsible for explosive rates of suicide, domestic violence, overdoses, and depression. In the long run, these maladies from the lockdowns will probably kill and harm many more people than COVID-19. This approach to following the money leads to the question of whether the spread of coronavirus was set in motion as a pretext. One is that in the autumn of 2019, the economy was already starting to falter. Fortuitously, for some, the new virus came along at a moment when it could be exploited as a scapegoat, by placing responsibility for the economic debacle on pathogens rather than people. Wall Street bankers and federal authorities are left off the hook. They can escape any accounting for an economic calamity that they had a hand in helping to instigate. I graded this article and report excellent. The economic meltdown had quietly been reported since its initial occurrence in September of 2019. It was since January 20th that a repetitive stream of headlined coronavirus economic meltdown stories began appearing and heavily circulating, because I had been following it since 2019, September, and the repo markets crash prior to the COVID crisis. I knew something was up. Ask questions, demand answers. White elites are literally having us argue about masks, while without masks, they have been robbing the citizens' treasury blind, yet again. And next,
calling on white Americans. Reparations for slavery are due. Tagline: the legacy of slavery is far more resolved. It persists every day and everywhere. From the publication The Boston Globe, authors and writer David Gardinier and Karen Hilfman. Since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis by a white police officer and the resounding anti-racist uprisings around the world, The concept of reparations has picked up momentum in national conversations and has sparked new public curiosity and interest. Among Black people and their ancestors, however, reparations for slavery have been on their hearts and minds for a very long time. True Black history, which few white people, including us, learn in school, points to numerous calls for reparations for Black Americans, such as efforts centered on the passage of bills in Congress. Even after all these years and excruciating efforts, our country still has never managed to atone for the brutal devastation that began in 1619, when enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown, Virginia. The legacy of slavery is far from resolved. It persists every day and everywhere, as evidenced by income and wealth inequality, disparate living conditions and health outcomes, police brutality and mass incarceration, and the overall white supremacist system that treats white and Black lives in vastly different ways. I graded this article good.
And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the article, Kamala Harris is Asian and Black. That shouldn't be confusing in 2020, but it is to some. Tagline, questions about what constitutes Blackness aren't new. Black people's ability to answer those questions for themselves is. From the publication NBC News Think Opinion column. Author and writer, Nadra Niddle. I will ask the questions and Daud will give the answers. Can you explain the controversy surrounding Senator Harris and her race?
During her 2020 presidential campaign, Senator Kamala Harris found herself at the center of a controversy about which Americans can claim to be Black, or Black enough, because of both her biracial identity and her immigrant parents.
Oh wow, that's a double whammy. Do you believe this was a smear campaign, or are people legitimately asking because they don't know?
Born to a Jamaican father and an Indian mother, Harris was subject to a smear campaign insinuating that she was not Black at all, which began anew immediately after presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden announced she was his pick for the vice presidential nomination.
So did the questioning of her identity start with the VP announcement, or was there another time this came up?
After a July 2019 debate, critics took issue with her for discussing a topic they viewed to be most relevant to American Descendants of Slavery, ADOS, busing to racially integrate schools. Although Harris was bused to a majority white school in California as part of a desegregation campaign, her lineage didn't include enslaved African Americans, the group such efforts targeted, her detractors argued.
Well, in that case, the criticism may have been warranted, as she tried to unsuccessfully use the civil rights struggles and integration as something she had to bear the cost of, when in fact, the opposite was true.
To have her Blackness questioned in this way must have been jarring for a woman who graduated from the historically Black Howard University, was born in Oakland, California, hometown of the Black Panther Party, and has likely been viewed as Black by a majority white society. But the questions about what constitutes Blackness aren't new.
Well, I would agree that questioning Blackness isn't new, but just as well, being born in Oakland and attending Howard University does not make anyone a Black person. Is there anyone that can empathize with Senator Harris? Someone who else had similar questions of their identity?
When he ran for president, Barack Obama also faced questions about his racial identity, having grown up outside the continental United States without his Kenyan father. And when he identified as solely Black on the 2010 census form, some mixed-race activists openly expressed their disappointment with his decision to exclude his white heritage, even though he did not have the option to identify as biracial until a decade before, in the 2000 census, which took place well into his adulthood, and 3 years after he had begun serving in the Illinois State Senate.
Oh, wow. I would be curious to see how he identified prior to running for political office. It may explain his disdain for ADOS, African Americans. In what way did the census play a role in redefining identity in America?
Until 2000, the federal government hadn't allowed members of the public to identify as two or more races on the census. For most of the 20th century, Americans either had to pick one race or other, a shift from even the late 1800s when the census included racial designations for people with fractions of African ancestry.
Did anyone oppose the census allowing citizens to choose multiple races?
After the 2000 census gave mixed-race people more options, civil rights groups for African Americans and Asian Americans challenged the move, fearing the voting power of people of color would be diluted if the multiracial category reduced their counted populations during the congressional appointments process.
Well, in hindsight, this opposition actually goes against those groups' best interest because it hides the reality and true data for each of those groups when they are lumped together like that. But ultimately, in the end, who won the census fight?
It was already evident that multiracial people were increasingly choosing not to identify as any one race. 2 million Americans selected the other category on the 1990 census. As a result, multiracial activists had spent the next decade campaigning for the government to allow for multiple racial identities on the census form, and succeeded.
So people fought for and won the privilege of specifically defining your race on the census. And this is a bad thing?
The multiracial option isn't the only way that the census, which also included the term African American for the first time in 2000, will have complicated Black identity. Black people from immigrant backgrounds may now specify their ethnic origins on the 2020 census, which owes a debt to the same campaign 2 decades ago to differentiate the types of Blackness in America.
How does this complicate Blackness and not whiteness? You can identify as white, Middle Eastern, or Russian. People want to identify by their family lineage. I don't see the issue. Do you feel other voices or movements may have played a part in this push to be specific?
Yes, the change coincides with the rise of the ADOS movement, which seeks to prioritize the socio-political goals of African Americans whose families have lived in the United States for generations, rather than their counterparts whose families arrived recently and voluntarily.
So ADOS has shown that the data is not being presented accurately when everyone is lumped together as people of color or everyone with melanin. They've shown lumping everyone together erases those who are struggling to those who were able to come to America after slavery, after Jim Crow, after civil rights were won, after less obstacles were placed in front of them, therefore achieving an easier path to success.
Yes, they have shown that Black immigrants to the United States enjoy higher household incomes and rates of educational attainment than U.S.-born African Americans, a trend that gets overlooked when the Black experience is universalized.
And like clockwork, I'm sure you have found people who do not agree with ADOS.
The movement has many detractors, some of whom view it as divisive at best and xenophobic at worst. Others have argued that it ignores the long history of African Americans with immigrant roots, including Black nationalist Marcus Garvey, who was Jamaican, and Nation of Islam leader Malcolm X, whose mother was Grenadian.
Okay, there is nothing divisive or xenophobic about defining yourself. As you pointed out earlier, people fought to be able to do it. And furthermore, Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey arose during a time when the one-drop rule was widely accepted. So they identified and allied with ADOS African Americans. We recognize that, and it does not erase them from being a part of our history.
Similarly, the idea that multiracial people are distinct from other Black people overlooks the history of mixed-race civil rights activists such as Homer Plessy, Walter Francis White, Adam Clayton Powell, and Diane Nash, all of whom could have passed for white.
The immigrants and multi-race people you mentioned lived and identified as African American during a time when we were all lumped together, and they chose to identify as Black. It's a lazy argument. Not only that, ADOS has not divided or disparaged immigrants, but had defined who was included in the justice claim for reparations. And because of that, ADOS have had to be defensive under attacks for doing exactly what people said we should do, which is to be specific.
Still, 20 years into the movement to allow mixed-race Americans to acknowledge their differentiation from Black Americans, the multiracial demographic is one of the fastest growing groups in this country.
And you see that as a bad thing?
No comment.
Well, I believe the reason for that is there just are more multiracial couples dating, marrying, and having children. But let's just move on. You point out that nowadays a lot more people are less inclined to see someone as Black with only a trace of African.
Yes, it's fair to say that the oldest Gen Zers and the youngest millennials are unfamiliar with a society that deemed someone wholly Black and nothing else for having a trace of African ancestry. Today, it's not uncommon for young people with two Black parents to view themselves as completely distinct from those with just one. Hence, the outcry that the new show Black AF didn't exclusively star actors with two Black parents, or the recent charges of anti-Black racism leveled at the biracial rapper Doja Cat.
Sounds like this is a generation issue. More people are identifying as biracial and not Black.
Yes, Meghan Markle, born to a Black mother and a white father exactly 20 years after Obama, has consistently identified as biracial, reinforcing the generational divide in perceptions of Black identity. Or take singer-songwriter Kalani, who has white, Black, and Native American ancestry. In May, she gave fans permission on Twitter to call her mixed. For a multiracial woman, that's not exactly a groundbreaking announcement, but the reasons she gave for doing so reflect a shift in how Black identity is viewed today. The 25-year-old R&B star explained the importance of recognizing that she does not face the same issues as Black women with two Black parents, and that to suggest otherwise perpetuates the erasure of these women.
Well, at least she gets it. The one-drop rule has been mentioned several times, but not many people recognize it anymore. Do people even know what it means? Can you define it?
Generations ago, when the archaic one-drop rule, which declared that a drop of African blood made one Black, still shaped African American identity, these discussions about authentic representations of Blackness weren't as likely to occur. In 1982, Susie Guillory Phipps, who didn't realize until adulthood that she was 3/32 Black under the law, fought the state of Louisiana to have the race listed on her birth certificate changed from colored to white. She lost, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the case.
Do you think that the ADOS Black community may want people to define themselves as Black due to this country stereotyping them as being lazy welfare queens and criminals, that we want to identify ourselves with successful people of color as our own, doing this in order to get white acceptance?
As recently as the 1990s, mixed-race people were typically encouraged to identify, or simply identified in society, as Black, even if they looked racially ambiguous, i.e. Mariah Carey. And it was considered laughable, if not unthinkable, that a darker-skinned multiracial person would reject the Black category in favor of identifying as multiracial. Golf star Tiger Woods is a case in point. In 1997, he was widely ridiculed for saying that he didn't consider himself as Black, but Camelinasian, a portmanteau of Caucasian, Black, Indian, and Asian, representing the entirety of his racial background. Just 3 years later, Woods and other mixed people who didn't want to be boxed into one racial category would be vindicated by the census. And today, Blasian is an acceptable way for people of mixed Asian and Black heritage to refer to themselves.
With that being said, wouldn't one say Kamala is Blasian? No? Oh, okay. Moving on. I think this is why ADOS believes identifying with our lineage is important. People have fought to be able to be specific in identifying who they are, which is why I don't understand what the issue is with saying who Kamala is. She is Jamaican and Asian. The question of Kamala's race or identity, even in this short article, covered a gamut of issues, which included race, ethnicity, and lineage. Race is entrenched in the bed of America, and we are till this day still deep in its original intent centuries ago. Any last words on how we can move past this as an issue?
Unbound by the one-drop rule, or even by the broad term African American, Black people in the United States have more freedom than ever to identify themselves as they choose. For some, that means not describing themselves as solely Black. For others, that means specifying their ethnic origins, embracing the ADOS label, or taking none at all. Each choice is potentially controversial, but more important than how any one person identifies is that Blackness in this country has long been nuanced and always will be.
We are not post-racial, and someone's race affects how America treats and accepts you. We know that Kamala has brown skin, that her father is Jamaican and mother Asian. She is not ADOS, and that is the reason we believe she was selected. Moving past this issue would mean seeing her for her policies and her plans. Instead, the media keeps us focused on her race. Well, that completes this interview. Listeners, you can read this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned. We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. So what do we think of this article?
I think they did a fair to good job on addressing the issues surrounding and involved on the quote unquote race of Kamala Harris. Yeah, it did just that.
It wasn't until I was well into reading the article that I realized they mentioned ADOS. I have to admit, the title was a clickbait for me, so that's the reason why I chose it. But we were mentioned, I think, fairly, in the sense that we, like many other people in this country, fought or are fighting to identify ourselves specifically with our lineage, with our family's history, and not just a blanket of, we're all Black because used to be with the one drop rule, you were Black, because even if you presented or could pass as white, but even that is seen as being divisive. When you're even in the article, they brought it up. Really, multiracial people, biracial people, have for centuries and decades been wanting to be able to say, you know what, I have a white father, a Black mother, I have a Black mother, a white father, however their racial makeup is, and I want to acknowledge that on applications, on the census, I want to identify with both sides of my race. And they fought and they won that right to get those specificity. But when we're saying to the world, wait a minute, Kamala Harris is not only Black and Asian, she's not ADOS, her lineage is not the same as African American ADOS. And that's considered questioning her Blackness. That's it. When you do that, when you specifically say who she is, you're questioning her Blackness, and that's not fair. And the article in its own way points out we fought to be able to say and recognize that she's Asian and Black Jamaican, Blasian. And so what's the issue? If ADOS says, wait a minute, she's not us. Yes, she has melanin, she has brown skin. We recognize her as a person of color. We can ally with her if her policies align with what we need. But all of that is untrue. Her policies are detrimental to the ADOS community. And therefore, when we point that out, then the issue becomes, oh well, you just don't like her because she's multiracial or biracial, or you can't say that she's not ADOS. Well, she said she's not ADOS up until she was running for political office. I mean, I'm sure the color of her skin had everyone thinking that she was a black woman. She is a black woman, but she's not ADOS, and it's for you to understand the difference.
Well, the same reason that the issue of our questioning her blackness, as well as her rise to power, are the same, meaning that we're getting pushback, and the society as a whole is being conditioned to only see any questions of her policy involvement and advocacy is only seen that she represents black people. Therefore, whatever she does must be good for black people, because white elites don't want that to get out of the population's mindset. Any challenge to her policy measures from the ADOS movement has to be guided into telling people they're criticizing her blackness. And it should be obvious why. Because like Obama, his image was used to sell to black people that he will be good for you, both because he's in a black face in a high place, but also because the imposition or implication is that he will do good for you. The reality is white elites allowed him to rise so fast, as they've allowed her to rise so fast to being close to the presidency, because they are banking on the population, particularly the black population, to be so identified with the symbolism of her presence in that position that they will be willing to disregard their policy advocacy because we don't want to endanger their success. And so that was such an effective tool that Obama was able to achieve upon and against the interest of the black electorate, that they're willing to roll the dice again with Miss Kamala Harris.
And it's evident. All of that protest talk, stop. All of the things that you want change, stop. All you want now is Kamala Harris to be vice president.
Sad but true. And I hoped that we learned the lesson by 2012. Sadly, this is an indication that we haven't. And what I meant by 2012, at least by 2014, it was becoming more, black Americans were becoming more restless with Obama, because it was becoming ever present in their minds he wasn't going to do nothing. And shortly after that, we got the Promise Keepers. What is it? My Brother's Keeper. Can't help. Yeah, you can't help but laugh. We got my Brother's Keepers. But I want to say something for the first time, and I'm going to be saying this later in an article I'm going to write. The reason why we got My Brother's Keepers wasn't because of the reasons he gave. The reason we got My Brother's Keeper was because that's when, for the first time in this nation's history, from the psychological and psychiatric realm, they began noticing for the first time black children ages 5 to 13 killing themselves. This had always been, since the 1950s when they started this horrible stat, dominated by white youth in that age group. But for the first time since about roughly 2013 and 2014, it began noticed that black youth were killing themselves at that age group from 5 to 13. By 2014, 2015, the same age group had expanded from age 14 to 19. So what was Obama, the CBC, and the Democratic Party willing to do about that? They knew. If I knew, I was in the industry, I knew. What did they do? They formed an unfunded program, labeled it My Brother's Keeper, and sold that as a solution, not to the problem, but as the potential that the black electorate, because if the media would over and over repeat that black children were killing themselves after the crash of 2008 that decimated black wealth and forced black children into levels of poverty they had not experienced since the Second World War. It had predictable outcomes. One of them was suicide. So what was Obama, the CBC, and the Democratic Party to do? You got my brother's keeper. In case it got out that many people were dying on his watch. That's the only reason why we got an unfunded program. It's an unfunded program meant to be limited and never to answer to the real critical issues of our children committing suicide, more than any racial or ethnic group. So you are left with that, and the media didn't do that, so nothing much has come of my brother's keeper, because it was never meant to do anything. It was meant to only act as cover in case it did get out. So when did it start getting out? By about 2017, I started noticing more coverage of Black child suicide, culminating in 2019, where they're still talking about it because further studies have confirmed it. And people are doing this, and they're doing this, the white domination racist media is doing this within the context of a Trump administration. They didn't do it during the Obama administration, but they knew. And what did the CBC do in the summer of 2019? They said they would study it. It's obvious that blackness is used as a cover to do stuff just like this. And we have to get up on that. This is where I find the article fair, because they took the lineage question to be a justification for questioning people's racial identity, when that's a failed idea, because people don't have cultures based on their mixedness overall. So why did they divert it to even that question? Because they didn't want to deal, and this is why it's fair, with the lineage question, how we are asserting that argument because of things like what I've just shared with you. They're able to do this, and they're banking on Kamala Harris to continue that type of behavior, ignoring our pain, because her image allows her to identify as blackness, which is why any questions of lineage has to be shunted to the idea of questioning her blackness, so they can continue to do what Obama was successful and able to do: decimate Black life.
That's it for our commentary on today's main event. Check back next week for another great interview.
Hashtag ADOS, where we grab our favorite tweets from the week under the hashtag ADOS and share them with our listeners. Up first, we have
from Vandal at I am Vandal 617 said on August 14th, I don't understand why more Caribbean Americans, Jamaicans specifically, are not side-eyeing Kamala Harris. Her ancestors literally may have owned your ancestors. Hashtag ADOS.
On August 13th, Antonio Moore at Tone Talks said, stop saying ADOS are questioning Harris's blackness. She's a black woman. She is not ADOS, and her nomination is based on that confusion. It's not whether Kamala is black enough, critics say, but whether her policies will support ADOS Black Americans.
Ibrahim Tanner at Ibrahim Tanner 1 said on August 13th, politicians are not celebrities. They are civil servants. Black America sacrificed our community's success for the Obama family personal success. Learning from our mistakes means Kamala Harris' success should be tied to ADOS community uplift. No black agenda, no black vote.
Another one from Antonio Moore at Tone Talks. On August 11th, he said, understand at Kamala Harris as vice president nominee is not ADOS. President at Barack Obama was not ADOS. Even the first attorney general, Eric Holder, was not ADOS. America is sitting this on top of African American struggle from slavery to Jim Crow, then casting ADOS to the bottom.
A tweet from Michelle Obama. This is not the time to withhold our votes in protest or play games with candidates who have no chance of winning. We have got to vote like we did in 2008 and 2012. Hashtag Dem Convention. In response to her tweet, DAP/ADOS Tribe at Black Action said the following. What Michelle Obama is saying is your vote is not your vote. You have to vote the way they want you to. Hashtag reparations now. Hashtag ADOS. Hashtag down ballot. Hashtag never Biden, never Kamala. And as always, listeners, you can find these tweets in our show notes on our webpage, as well as follow them on Twitter through the links.
Today our people can see that we're faced with a government conspiracy. This government has failed us. The senators who are filibustering concerning your and my rights, that's the government. Don't say it's Southern senators, this is the government. We're coming to get our checks.
Pays for the separation of our family. Pays for the degradation of slavery. 400 years forced to work for free. Reparations, reparations. Pays for the rape, great 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 mommy. Pays for the take of our land and property. Pays for the genocide of our ancestry. Pays for the colonized, broken treaties. No statute of limitations. Reparations, reparations. Better make preparations. Pays for the separation of our family. Pays for the degradation of slavery. 400 years forced to work for free. Reparations, reparations. Pays for the dead. Equity. Pays for the blood well. Building our country. Pays for the lynching tree. PTSD. Pays for Jim Crow. We all know you owe reparations. 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 Reparations.
Reparations by Aria Elan. You can find her on YouTube Music, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. There you have it, another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list and see the show notes for today's episode.
Be sure to tune in next Friday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
You can now catch us live 10 a.m. on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus. Until next time, family, stay safe and stay strong. Peace.